For men, testosterone levels are just tanking. So it's like, first is the question of why. And obviously I have a lot of ideas: sedentary behavior, poor nutrition introduced into our environment. So, we're consuming about a credit card's worth of microplastics and nanoplastics. Every month they found microplastics in every organ, from men's genitalia to the placenta to the liver. And there's a direct relationship between your gut and your brain. We are dealing with unprecedented levels of mental health issues. So if you feed your body junk, you can expect to perform like junk, feel like junk. But the thing about chronic conditions, specifically here in the US, is that doesn't happen overnight. That's the product of the last decade of your life. Waiting for someone to come and fix the food system for you is not going to help you right now, and it's not going to help you in your future, and it's not going to help you reduce the risk of chronic disease.
Thank you. If that's okay with you, we're going to move it on to brain health, which is maybe the area which interests me the most. So I just wanted to ask you about, maybe to begin, some things that you've learned about the brain since your time doing research, which our viewers would find surprising, and otherwise just some key ideas about the brain which can help people to understand their brains and how to look after them.
Absolutely. I think one really important thing is there's a direct relationship between your gut and your brain. So it's the gut-brain connection. So we are dealing with unprecedented levels of mental health issues, right? That can be anxiety, depression, et cetera, but it's the number one cause of disability worldwide at this present moment. So when we look at what we're eating and how we're eating, we have to think about our gut. I do a lot of gut testing. So I love the test by GIFX. It's from a company called Genova, but it's a really in-depth analysis of gut dysbiosis, inflammation, if you have any bacteria, pathogens, etc. But your gut houses most of your serotonin, which we know and we call, the happiness hormone. It also actually houses neurons in your gut, and your gut and your brain communicate directly. So if you want to, just kind of start optimizing your gut health, many times we see brain health improve, cognition, focus, etc. So I think that is super, super important. I think something that I learned that has always stayed in my brain is the blood flow is so important when it comes to brain health, right? We really need to be thinking about blood flow, and you can increase blood flow through, of course, exercise, but even things like sauna. I mentioned hyperbaric oxygen. That was such a big thing for anyone that's ever had a brain injury or a TBI or a concussion, or, just wants to improve blood flow to the brain. Hyperbaric oxygen, which is combining pressure with oxygen, can be really helpful as well. But you can just exercise and get your blood flowing and get it moving throughout the brain. I think that's really, really important. I mentioned this earlier, but the fact that the brain is consuming so many of your caloric intake every day, that's also something to be very aware of, because if you want to have a high performing brain, you have to give it high performing fuel. And there's really no way around that. I think something else that, obviously has changed in medicine, but I think is a pretty widely known fact now, is that, we can change the way our brain functions. So, if we think of our brain by the time we're about 25 as a hard set of wired, basically you get input X and it spits out output Y. So event happens, you process it, and you react the same way because of all of your exposures prior to that, events that have happened in your life, how you felt about yourself, how you've been treated. But we know because of neuroplasticity, we can actually change the way that we think. It's most certainly not an easy process, but it can be done. You can use things like a gratitude practice. There's a lot of interesting therapies, and of course, therapy in general can help with that. But I love the idea that we're not stuck with the same brain that we had last year. We have the ability to change the way that we think. We have the ability to change the way that our brain functions. And to me, that is just super fascinating.
Yeah, there's so much recent research, especially around CBT and epigenetics and also gut health. So there's so much here that's new and exciting, and perhaps is a bit of a blanket question. And I understand it might be a bit of an oversimplification. I was wondering which you think is more important. Is it behaviors and our daily behaviors? Or is it perhaps nutrition and what we put into our mouths?
So I think of the brain as in two ways. I think of it as the hardware. So we have the physical aspects of the brain, right? And that's going to be significantly impacted by how we treat the brain, which is our daily habits. I mean, sleep also it's absolutely necessary to get deep in REM sleep for the brain. That's like the rest and restorative phase. Although the brain is super active still at night, I think of it as like a cleaning phase, like cleaning out the waste products. So that is all super important. So the hardware is what we eat, not doing drugs, not smoking. All of the things that we know are bad for our health is most certainly bad for our brain. But then there's the software component, which is how you think. And that's equally, I think, as important. I always say you can't outperform your level of self-esteem. So if you don't think you're worthy of great health, or you don't think that you are worthy of success, you're not going to be able to achieve it, because you won't even do what is necessary to get there. So I think that they're honestly equally as important. Sometimes I think the easier way to go is to start with upgrading the hardware, because it also can influence the software. Example, changing your diet, which will then help with your gut health, which will then help with your brain health. But many times people find it much more difficult to address things like trauma or stress management. So I would say that could be like phase 2. Of course, if you want to do a phase 1, so be it. Great. But I think maybe the easier way to go might be to start with the hardware and then, feed in some of these software upgrades.
It's interesting, the hardware software distinction, because I think it really feeds into what you were talking about with what you learned from Dr. Daniel Amen, which is actually that the brain scans are so important. And that actually not just taking it from a perspective of how they're feeling, etc., but also what's really going on underneath. And so I suppose my question is, from brain scans with things like depression, which you've said is the number one cause of disability globally, what are we learning about the way depression functions, and how we can look to prevent that specifically?
Well, you should definitely have Dr. Amen on to go into all the logistics, but
I'd love to.
Yes, PECT it's looking at activity and blood flow. And from what I've learned through my training with him, a lot of it goes back to blood flow, like areas of decreased blood flow in the brain or areas of activity that are too high. So it's really working to bring it into homeostasis with his protocols that he recommends, which often are a lot of the things we've already talked about: changing the diet, hyperbaric, usually, he recommends that to many people that are having any blood flow issues, but it can all look very different. Like there's many different types of ADD and ADHD. There's also several different types of Alzheimer's. So these can all have a different signature, each of which would require a different kind of protocol. But definitely from what I learned there, mastering the basics, thinking about maybe hyperbaric for brain health, and then also even sometimes using supplements like saffron is great for boosting your mood, for example. But we also know that exercise in studies outperforms Zoloft. I have to say, this is in no way saying you should go off medication. You should talk to your doctors and never make any sudden changes without consulting them. But that's really interesting, right? Like consistent exercise can outperform some of these medications. So I have seen it in my own life and with people, that we work with. Lifestyle changes can be really impactful for things like depression, and depression is very, very real. And I don't want to discount that in any way, but the way I think of it is you have to at least give yourself a fighting chance if you can. So getting sunlight exposure, optimizing your vitamin levels, moving your body, getting high quality sleep, that's going to put you in a much better position than, as you mentioned, the standard, daily American life of waking up groggy, grabbing a quick carb for breakfast, you're late to the office, you're cursing people out on the way there, you're inducing your stress, you get to your job, it's a job that you don't like, that causes more stress, you don't move throughout the day, you're in with, fluorescent lighting that is junk light, and you're just staring at your computer, you're not getting outside, you're not getting fresh air, you go home, well, you eat some sort of, processed quick lunch because you didn't have time to pack one or make something, you go home, you flick on the TV, you have a couple beers. I mean, that sounds like an absolute nightmare to me. That's like so opposite of my life. And because all my friend group is super healthy, I don't know anyone that does that, but I do know that that's like a vast majority of people.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is.
It is.
That is not,
especially at uni where we are as well. Or college, you should say.
yeah. I mean, but why though? How is that the best option? Normal being, if this is normal, that's like the last thing on the planet Earth I want to be.
No, I understand completely. Yeah, no, and I agree with you. I think for most people, I think most people kind of roughly know what they need to do. You know, like you said, so much of it at the beginning is simple. Everybody, you know, people ask all these kind of in-depth questions, for example, about specific studies, but everybody kind of knows, like you've said, they need to stop eating Mackies. They need to maybe walk a bit more. They need to get outside. You know, things like this, it's actually can be quite simple. So I think it's more than a knowledge issue. Often it can be kind of a motivation or just kind of falling into a habit issue, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's why I really wanted to talk about the purpose and the plan, because without a purpose and a plan, these are not necessarily easy habits. Like there's been plenty of days where I didn't want to go to the gym, but then I thought to myself, you know, what if I only did things I felt like doing? My life would be a disaster. Like I would have nothing that I have now. I wouldn't have built successful companies. I wouldn't have an amazing marriage. I wouldn't have found an amazing husband. I wouldn't have anywhere near the life that I have now if I only did things I wanted to. It would be a complete mess because by nature, humans are not wired to want to do hard things. We want to have the path of least resistance, self-preservation, and take the easiest route because that would let us rest and restore for something that was coming in the future. But that's not the life we're living. So we have to push through that, and we have to have a real purpose and motivation behind what we're doing so that we actually stick to it.
Do you want to frolic freely at the beach, hairless both upstairs and downstairs? Tired of being left bloody, stumbling and alone because of a bad razor? Then you know what to do. Get yourself a Manscaped. With the new Beard and Balls bundle, you can stay fresh all over. Use the discount code LOW for 20% off now. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that short clip of our episode with Kayla Barnes. If you want to see the full thing, you can click right here. Please like and subscribe as well because it really helps the channel, and we got loads more content just like this coming. See you guys next time.